Welcome to Marlowe House Presents Insights and Inspiration. I'm Andrew Marlowe, and as you can see, tonight I am here on my own. It's a little weird. It's extra quiet in here, not a whole lot of extra joking because I'm alone. So, when I'm left alone, I have to come up with something else to talk about. So, tonight I thought we would talk a little bit about some things in the Cypher GM's toolbox, things that you can use at your table since we've been playing quite a bit of the Cypher system, particularly with Scoundrels of a Stranger Sky and some of the Numenera stuff that we've run, like Longest Night and Two Moons Above or Beneath Two Moons. I can never get that title straight. Sorry, James. So with that, let's just jump right on in and welcome to the show. So the first thing I kind of want to talk about is how the game is run in loose terms. We've played it a lot, and I know we ran a tutorial, but I thought I would kind of cover the principal thing that as a GM you really need to focus on, and that is difficulties. We have to set the difficulty. And the way as a GM you set the difficulty is you figure out what the task is, and you set the difficulty based on the task, not the people trying to perform it. So in for instance, you know, anything can be a task. So driving to work, that probably falls in the category of a routine difficulty. It's not something you're probably going to make the characters roll, so you might set something like that at a 0. I like to use, when I'm explaining the rules, I like to use like surgery. And so I tend to set that difficulty in a much higher category. Much higher. Hold on one second, guys. Apparently, I left the area and the browser went squirrely on me again because, this never happens. It's never like this. So, at any rate, all right. Backing this up. So when we're talking like higher difficulties, things like, surgery, hacking a computer, you might set those at challenging or intimidating. And there are in the rule book, you set every difficulty between 0 and 10, and each difficulty has a descriptive listing. Routine is 0, and simple would be 1, standard is 2, demanding is 3, difficult 4, challenging 5, and on and on and on, all the way up to 10, impossible. And everything from 7 to 10 is functionally impossible if all you're doing is picking up the die. So these are things, like I said, like, if you were doing surgery, in most cases, untrained, unprepared, unequipped, surgery is not something you can just do. It is going to be at least what they call formidable in the chart. So it would be something that you're not going to just get lucky with. That said, there are always ways to bring the difficulties down, and that's kind of the first thing I want to talk about, is things that you can have in your toolbox as a GM. Now, I like to have these jumbo-sized D10s, and I usually keep a handful of them on, a few of them on hand, because I tend to assign one per player if I need them for larger group situations, because as people are telling me I lower the difficulty, I can start with my 7 for, in some cases I can start with my 7, and then it says, I want to lower the difficulty by 2. I can just tick that down 6, 5, and then so I know that they've spent effort or they have training in something, and so that's their new difficulty number, and I can keep track of that right there in front of me. And if I've got several of them, and I tend to color code them per player, so I've got a different color for each player at the table, and I can keep track of who's got what, and who set their difficulties where, so that when they then start telling me their roll results, I have the immediate answer right there in front of me. I don't have to do a lot of erasure. It's just easily changed out. So that's my first suggestion for GMs who are feeling a little bogged down. Get something, you could just write it down on a piece of paper. I like the dice, but if you want to write them down on index cards, things like that, and let people, make the adjustments on there, that works too. Whatever works for you. But I do recommend having something so that you have a notation of who's adjusted the difficulties by what. Now, if they tell you, if you know what the difficulty is and they're just telling you at the same time they're rolling, you don't necessarily need this system. You may or may not find it useful at that point, but it's one of those things that you kind of have to play with and see how your group works. Frequently, I use the dice, and then sometimes while we're playing, I don't necessarily. It depends on how things are going. Because the way we film this, you can't always see me pulling out the dice and setting them on the table, but I was using them probably roughly half the time, maybe, and I only was dealing with 2 players, and so it was a little bit less frequently than I do it when I have a table full of people, but it is something I still do. I'll sometimes do it even if it's just a single person rolling the die, because it's still easier for me to track it and keep track of what I'm doing. So that's something you can do. Speaking of tracking things, tracking initiative. In the Cypher system, everybody rolls initiative, and the monsters pretty much go, or the NPCs go when they're slotted by their level, because like other difficulties, the opponents that your players will face act on their level. So a level 6 NPC is going to be going on initiative 6. So what I do is, on a piece of paper, I'll kind of keep a 3 area tally if it's only the party versus like one big monster, or I'll break it up a little bit more detailed if the opponents come in at different levels. But the way I do it, I don't bother with who rolled highest, who rolled lowest. Once I figure out who went first, which is to say who goes before if you get a players, back this up and make this simpler. So I basically make a chart with 3 spaces. First, foe, last. So if doing initiative, 2 players roll above, I will put their names in the first column, and then anybody who rolled lower than the monster's level will go in that last column. And then they can take their actions in any order they want at that point. Because I'm not worried about, and the game's not worried about, who goes first so much as, tactically speaking, as much as it makes who it makes sense for them to who it makes sense to take the first action. Basically, in D20 terms, think of it as the person who rolled highest is permitted to basically delay their action until somebody else does something, and they can make those decisions. We don't have to track the specific initiative numbers. We can just do first, enemy, and then last. If you have multiple enemies, you may want to break that up. So it may be first enemy, middle group, enemy 2, and last. But that's a level of detail that only comes up if you've got larger numbers of opponents that have differing level adjustments, which you may or may not have. But again, it's not exactly difficult to track. So that's sort of my second recommendation regarding difficulties. And since we were talking tracking things, one of the things that we do at our table We haven't been doing this for our streams because, well, because I don't have enough poker chips. But at our table, and this is actually Monica's characters box for our Sunday game for when we play Numenera. And inside this little box here, we keep the experience points they've earned, and we use the experience point cards, which if you're not using these cards, I definitely recommend having something like this, cards of some sort or some other tracking chits to keep things. Yes, you have XP, Monica. So at any rate, have something to keep track of the XP and hand that out, and then they can keep track of that. The other thing that we have in the box here is I keep poker chips on hand in 3 different colors. Somewhere in here she's got a third color. Oh, that's right, she switched to green. I forgot. We started to run out of one of the colors, so Monica switched out her white chips for green chips. But we do poker chips in 3 different colors, and those represent your the player's stat pools, so that as they spend them, they can discard them and then repick them, pick them back up once they need to heal, and they only have to make notations at the end of the night as to how much of any particular stat that they have used, and so it cuts back on the amount of erasures and things that you have to do at the table, and it keeps it visual for all the other players at the table so that they can see just how winded and worn out their allies are. They don't get a perfect count because they're going to just be kind of stacked in front of each other, but the general gist of it is you can tell when your friends are panting and practically falling down because they've been beat on by the great big beastie that you guys just fought, or exhausted from climbing that wall where they spent a ton of effort to get up it. So you've got a lot of different, there's some role playing opportunities there, and it's a easy way for players to track things. Plus, you can kind of eyeball the table and see where everybody's standing too. So that's pretty useful. Those are a couple of the tools that I have at my table that are sort of like extra bits. So the large dice, the poker chips, they're not really required, but I definitely recommend them. The other thing I kind of want to talk about tonight, and we're going to keep this pretty short this evening, is as far as tracking things and things like that, is intrusions. I'm going to do an episode in the future that talks more about how to do intrusions and what to focus on. But this evening, I'm going to keep this all very short and sweet, to the point, and I'm just going to say that when you're doing intrusions, keep track of who's gotten how many over the course of your campaign. Try to keep those numbers even. I just put down everybody's name, and I do little hatch marks on a notebook page. I do this, and that way I can keep it more or less fair. Now, somebody's going to creep ahead here and there, and they may creep ahead by 2 or 3, but once they get far enough ahead of somebody else, because sometimes when things come up, there are times when you just have to, you can't keep it perfectly balanced. There are times when somebody does something that basically begs for an intrusion. Don't be afraid to go over it, but start to peel those back once they start to get more than, 2 hash marks ahead of everybody else in the party, because that means that everybody else isn't getting even experience points. And that's a good way to keep track of it, make sure everything stays fair throughout the course of the game, and that nobody also feels like they're being picked on, because you may have somebody who doesn't like intrusions at all, and they don't want to be intruded on any more than everybody else is. So I definitely recommend keeping track of that. So those were a couple of the things I had in tonight's Insight and Inspirations advice for Cypher GMs. I wanted to keep this very short, mostly because this was not intended to be long streams on Tuesdays. We wanted to do shorter streams that just focused on one or two small topics. Sometimes we might run longer, like last week we ran an entire hour because we were speaking to Hal about the Awakened Isle of Bones Kickstarter and the short story that Hal, Monica, and I collaborated on to write. If you have not yet gone and checked out the Kickstarter, I highly recommend it. It's awesome. You can, for like $6, you can get our short story and a bunch of free ones. So please, by all means, go check that out. As always, this video is brought to you pretty much exclusively by our patrons. And I just want to do a quick transition here, let you guys, see some of the people who have been backing us and say thank you to all of them. We couldn't do this without you, and we greatly appreciate what you've done so far that have allowed us to really manage to make this work. So thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to say good night. Thank you very much. This has been Insights and Inspiration, Cypher GM's Toolbox this evening. Look for more episodes every Tuesday and watch for our weekly hangout. And we'll be back again on Friday. Definitely come in and check that out. Come chat with us, say hey, and I'll see you then. Good night, everybody.